Welcome to the church library. Draw up a chair and join us as we sort through these stacks of old books. I'm Marissa Burt.
And I'm Kelsey McGinnis. And here in the church library, we host conversations about popular Christian books. This season, we are dusting off Christian parenting resources.
Our book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families, examines many of these books, the obscure, the bestsellers, the ones that still pop up in church parenting classes.
Let's see what's on the bookshelves today. Hi, Marissa.
Hi, Kelsey. Good to see you.
Good to see you in the church library.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, listeners. Thanks for joining us again this week. We are really excited because we have a guest that we have been waiting to talk to.
Yes, I am thrilled that Tia Levings is here with us today. She is the author of the book, A Well-Trained Wife, which is a New York Times bestseller. Congratulations, Tia. Tia also appeared, some of you may have seen her in the documentary series Shiny Happy People last year, which told the story of the Duggar family and explored the connections between them and fundamentalist Christian organizations and figures like Bill Gothard. She writes and talks on social media about life as a woman, wife, and mother in Christian fundamentalism and her experiences there and how she escaped that. And her story illuminates so many of the downstream impacts of Christian life teaching in these circles. So thank you so much for being here, Tia.
Thanks for having me. This feels like such a full circle moment as you guys are on the cusp of your book.
Yes, it is. And both of us have talked to you. I talked to you for an article I wrote on Tradwives a while ago now at this point. And so your work has been, has sort of been coming out at the same time we've been working on this. And the conversations intersect in so many different ways. And I just love seeing that on social media and in your book, and we're so excited to see it hit the bestseller list and to see these conversations sort of come up higher and higher in the cultural conversation over the past 2 years. I saw that there's going to be a new season of Shiny Happy People.
Yeah, season 2 is coming out in a few weeks. They just dropped the trailer yesterday.
Yeah,
Which is crazy.
Powerful.
Yeah,
I was excited to see my husband and I both have weird intersections with the Acquire the Fire, which is the focus of the 2015 conference thing. So I'm really excited to see what they do with this season, because were you surprised at how kind of explosive that first season was?
Yes and no. I mean, I can feel the search for meaning and the search for explanations, the hungry audience. I could feel that energy for it. So I knew that it was going to splash. I knew we were making some explosive claims, and that there were a lot of us saying the same thing. So I felt like it's Amazon. So it's like, okay, it's going to be on everybody's TV screen real big. I mean, it was everything I thought it would be, but also not, also so much more. So,
Yeah, so important. And I guess I got the time, was that 2 years ago it came out? I think I said last year, but I guess it was 2 years.
I was on a boat and I watched the first half as we pulled into Southampton, hoping for there to be enough internet to watch it.
Wow. Yeah.
I didn't get to see it ahead of time. It was all like,
okay. Did that feel daunting?
It was very, and I had to split it. My story features prominently in episodes 2 and 4, and I had to take a break after 2. It was very intense. I did not know how they were going to edit the footage, and it was a lot. It was a lot because episode 2 talks about corporal punishment in some very visceral ways, and it's the hallmark. It's like the cornerstone of what we're drumming on here with the abuses in this regime, but it's a lot to see yourself on TV talking about your most vulnerable complicity and moments and victimization and all of it. So, yeah.
And to trust people with that interview, to be like, okay, I know what I said, but I'm not sure how they're going to tell this story.
The book was sold and written by that point, but this was my first global see what happens when the readers or viewers receive the story. And it was overwhelmingly positive. So that really did set me up well for when A Well-Trained Wife came out. I mean, here we are.
That series kind of came out of left field. I didn't really know it was coming. I wasn't super plugged in. And I remember watching it and thinking to myself, I had no idea who you were, but I remember watching you in those interviews and thinking, I cannot believe how well spoken and willing this woman is to share this story. Your interviews just stood out to me as someone who had just done so much thought in articulating the damage done. So I was thrilled when I found out that you were writing a book, and even more excited when I got in touch with you to talk for, the article on Tradwise. And so it's been really incredible to watch that gain momentum. So we're so excited that you're here. For readers who are not familiar with you and your book, or maybe you haven't seen Shiny Happy People, rather than asking you to kind of condense your whole memoir and life story into a couple minutes, I wondered if you could maybe introduce yourself by way of talking about the communities that you reflect on in your work and the ways that your experience intersects with like Christian parenting teaching and family life teaching, since that's kind of the focus of our work.
Yeah, and it's also the way the whole movement rises. So I'm a really big believer that high control religion is using the family model as their prototype that they will scale up to the government level. And it's the same authoritarianism and the same punitive top-down power structure at play. And it really does start with the family, which when you're a young woman growing up I was in an evangelical mega church originally. First Baptist Jacksonville, we had 20,000 people on the roll and a building that sat 10,000. And our pastor was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention. So this was not a fringe, cult group, where we were off in the jungle drinking Kool-Aid. This was like, we were on TV. And we were learning how to be godly men and women. We wanted to be good patriots, good parents. We wanted to have happy families and successful marriages like everyone else. And they were giving us the formula for it. So here's God's formula for success. And it's taught older women teach the younger women. So you are greased, I guess, like groomed is the word I use in the book, but you're always turning to an older, wiser woman for this wisdom. You're always listening to your pastors. The man of God is the same thing as God's voice. And so you are accepting everything that you heard. And what we were hearing, was a lot of white supremacy, a lot of patriot Christian nationalism and fundamentalism forming. It was becoming more narrow as the older I got. And so when I got married, without any sex education, without any instruction on chemistry or attraction or anything that you might want to think about with a successful partner, my only criteria was to accept who God said this was the man for my life. And we would know that because he would show up and say, I'm God's best for your life. And God told me I'm supposed to marry you. And so I retrofitted my vision for what I dreamed of, my Prince Charming and my Darcy, because I was a reader and, definitely had my Pride and Prejudice fantasies. I retrofitted it onto this guy, and he was a sailor, and he was very devout, and he was very hungry to be obedient and know more about God. And I really believed, hook, line, and sinker, that that would be okay. That as long as you hungered and longed for God, every problem you had would be solvable, fixable. Your mistakes would be honored. Like you would figure it all out. And I didn't realize what I was playing into. I got pregnant the first 3 months, and that miscarried that baby, and then had a second pregnancy 6 months. And so I was pregnant very quickly and a mother at 20. And I was by then in Bill Gothard's Institute of Basic Life Principles, but I didn't know it because I was mentored by an IBLP recruiter, these women who had gone back into the churches from a Bill Gothard conference to recruit other families, and they would mentor you. And all I knew is that I was asking an older, wiser woman for advice. What she knew was that she had the big red notebook, she had all the wisdom booklets, she had all of the Christian authors that we're going to talk about, and is definitely covered in your book. She had all of that, and she was going to use it to instruct me how to be what I wanted to be, which was a young wife and mother honorable to God. And to have a successful family. And the challenge was that my young husband was also mentally disorganized. He was overwhelmed with too much responsibility. He had no idea how to be a husband and a father or an employee or anything else. Like there's a lot of other things he didn't know how to do. That manifested in domestic abuse that the power structure fed. And the advice he was receiving was to continue doing it. So I was really in a no-win, no surviving situation. It did ultimately almost kill us. I escaped in 2007 with my kids at midnight after being essentially held hostage for 4 hours with a length of firewood and death threats. And we barely got out with our lives. And then I spent the next 10 years unpacking, well, how did I get there? And why did I stay so long? And why did I think that this was the acceptable? Why was this suffering so, I don't know, just something that I took for granted. I just thought that I was more like Christ if I suffered well. I didn't expect marriage to be easy or friendly or happy or loving. I expected marriage to be hard. We hear that all the time. Marriage is hard. And even though I had made a lot of steps at that point to change my parenting and to be less punishing, and, my kids, I think, are what saved me. I didn't start to make sense of it until the psychological world, started adapting language for religious trauma and high control groups and fundamentalism and PTSD and trauma responses. I started getting all of that language in psychology, and that shed light on what I was in and what the country is in now, because everything I ran away from in my marriage is in our government today. So we're confronted with these headlines daily.
Yeah, there's so much there. And even as you're explaining the situations, I think of the insularity of different groups, that it really leaves everyone ill-equipped to recognize how trapped they are, or how anomalous these things are. And I think people outside who maybe could offer help, if they're not in it, don't get how all-encompassing that is, and how the messaging is coming at people from every angle, from very young childhood on, and the messages connect. So yeah, suffering is godly, like this baptism of suffering, so that then it's almost like these roadblocks everywhere, so that if someone does feel your intuition is discounted, your emotions are sinful, so all these things that maybe could be avenues, gateways out, they're just blocked by different teaching and different community held beliefs. And it's so much to untangle. 10 years, that is a lot of work to be able to.
To my credit, I think it helped that I'm a writer. I was always a writer before. And so I had a sense making method and an investigative method and a research method to help. I always say, don't piss off a writer, because she'll tell your secrets. I got to a point in my recovery where I was like, they gave me a story, I'm going to tell it. And then it became really relevant in our news. So then I was like, I had to. It was the Duggar trial, where, which is how I ended up on Shiny Happy People, because it was the Duggar trial that snapped me. And I was like, that is not a single bad apple. He's a product of the system. And they produce people like that all the time. And abuse is part of the system itself. I call it church-sanctioned domestic abuse now, because it's abuse that the pastors and the teachers all say is God's design for your family.
Yep. There's a complicity there that I think Christians have yet to fully reckon with. And also, I think it resonates with so many people. We find this in our work as well. Even identifying things, naming things, is just an aha moment for a lot of people. Connecting those dots is very helpful, touch points for their own stories, whether they're adult children reflecting back, or people who've parented, or older adults. I'm kind of curious here, could you speak specifically to expectations and pressures that you felt were placed on parents in particular, especially as you talk about your mentors who really were motivated to help you follow this, preset godly path? What were some of the hallmarks of those teachings, would you say?
Yeah. So the image that continues to come up for me when I think of that, so first of all, I'll say that the tradwife movement that we see today is the same thing we had in the 80s and 90s. We just didn't call it that. We called it the longer form, traditional wives and mothers. And so there was a lot of sermon pressure to be a traditional wife and mother, and that would look like a narrowing image. Because when I was a child, we had working moms in the church. We had 2.2 standard, family sizes. And then that became this quiverful thing, which at first was very extreme in our Southern Baptist church. We would see somebody with 8 kids and prairie dresses, and we'd be like, well, they're just kind of like extra special. They're not what we don't all have to be that way. That's not more godly. That's just their lifestyle. And then by the time I was an adult, that was more godly. And there was a press to get rid of contraception and to get rid of employment for women and to stay home and to homeschool, and all these things that had been very fringe at the beginning of my adolescence was now more in the mainstream, and we were having conferences and things for it. So it was the beginning of the movement that we're seeing to fruition today. It started for me, like I really raised my hand for help when I realized that my newborn was going to cry at night, and that was going to keep my husband awake, and then he would abuse me more. And I was afraid he would abuse the baby. But from there, very quickly, it was like, how do you keep your children quiet in church? Because this group was not using the nursery, and the family integrated church movement was just getting born. They were just starting to insist on having their children in church with them. Our pastors hated that because they had spent all this money on nurseries, and they wanted the parents to use the nurseries. And so they would preach like, there's a baby over there making noise, and if you can't make it be quiet, we have a nursery across the street. And imagine thousands of people looking at you with your baby who's making noise in church. So mortifying, absolutely mortifying. So the pressure is on. You feel judged. You feel like you better get it together, or is it because it's all, the responsibility is all on you to make this child be quiet? And make this child be quiet is kind of the theme of every Christian parenting book, I think. Make this child cooperate, make this child do the thing. So yeah, I think they really play on maternal embarrassment, pressure, and you don't want any child thinking that they can have a expressed free will, because that will set them up for their theology later, to argue against God or to be too much of an individual. Because there's so much pressure to be uniform and cooperate and be part of the congregation in the corporate church that you can't have individuals. So it really does start and is applauded. I had pastors preaching sermons on the way women fulfill the Great Commission is through motherhood, is by having as many children as possible. And those are the souls you'll convert. Because, there's no guarantee your children are going to heaven. So you save them from hell through your motherhood, which is, as high of the stakes as you can get.
Yeah, especially for sincerely devout people. I mean, this is incredibly motivating. And yeah, we observed, it's interesting you mentioned that. When I first read Dobson's first book, Dare to Discipline, I was surprised at how you can even note in some of those earlier resources what you're talking about, the less extreme. Like there are working women. He kind of acknowledges men have a 9 to 5. Like it's just a very different cultural acceptability versus as you get into resources in the 80s and 90s that are definitely more intense, like the expectations just intensified. And
of you, because that is what happened. And to see it reflected in his texts and the way that the movement has narrowed and intensified, it's showing up in the books that are as they're published. Dobson was kind of super, almost secular to us. Ted Tripp, almost secular, because they were so mainstream. They're not. They're not.
Right. But you're feeling that too. Liberal.
Michael Pearl next to James Dobson, and you do see a degree of severity. And today I don't see a difference. I just see an audience size.
Absolutely. Yeah. There was one person we interviewed, a parenting expert in our for our book, who reflected back and thought that Dobson was too secular. Like we needed to really be only looking for. So he set out to write his own parenting resource that became really popular in homeschooling circles. But it's fascinating. What's that?
I won't be surprised to hear his name.
I'm sure. Yeah. And then something else you said, and then I know you have another question, Kelsey, but when you're talking about keeping the children silent, there's a woman who self-published a book. She was heavily in the Gothard movement. I can't remember her name offhand, but she coined this term, the cover the mouth method of child rearing. And it was like a grassroots one. And for me, when I read that, I could like feel it wash over me. Like this exemplifies what all of this is doing, and she basically advocates that parents should physically cover a child's mouth and hold them, restrain them on their lap until they stop making noise, as a as a training method from like infancy on. It's horrible. And in some ways it feels like, oh, well, that's not as bad as what Michael Pearl is saying, right? Like with plumbing line and these horribly abusive things. And yet it reads as this fundamental violation of the personhood of another human being. Like there's something very sinister about that dehumanization. Like, I will misuse you and cover your mouth, and you will lose your voice too. And that is a huge piece of the practices by which children are parented, but also we often say it mirrors what's happening in family life. And I hear you saying it mirrors political life, in that the people, the children in the system are expected to comply and be quiet.
Scale it up so quickly. You know, it did start with children, and that was sort of acceptable. A lot of parents like understood, like, well, yeah, you have to raise your children. You have to raise them in the admonition of the Lord. You know, they could kind of justify it. And one of the things that makes my story stand out is that I really call out that, no, they carry it to wives. There's not an age limit to that. And then they do experience it in like congregations, because there's men who are beta men. They're not the alpha men. The pastors don't get along. They split off, men split off, you know, and then they raise the government leaders. So, I mean, it really does scale as it goes. Because if that's the core of your belief of the power structure of God's design for the power structure, then all the other underlings are going to be silent, and they're all going to cooperate with what the top says to do.
Yeah. And as you're describing this and the growth of it, I think people who, like, of my generation who are children in the 90s do not understand just how new and novel this, like, just how much we are now observing the growth of this. Like, this hasn't always just been there. Like, I think for a long time, my impression was that had just always been there. There had always been a version of Bill Gothard. There had always been a version of James Dobson, but there really hasn't. Like, in a lot of ways, these are very novel movements and novel trends. And when you look at like the James Dobson's writing, not just his books, but also like what he would say on the radio to parents in the 70s versus what he was saying to them in the 90s. Huge difference, because in the 70s, the problems he saw himself responding to were different. And you're right. He did not like say advocate for homeschooling. Like he was one of those who was like very kind of pro public schools. He wanted to see like more discipline in the public schools, but he
had worked in them for a number of years. Yeah.
He was not telling Christian parents the public schools are ruining your kids, or he was not saying these are dangerous places. It's just teachers need to be more disciplinarian because parents aren't doing enough. But then like by the 80s and 90s, he starts to hedge a little more, and you start to see more and more mainstream, like kind of normie evangelical writers advocating for Christian schools and homeschools. And that trend has continued, I would say.
At times with No Child Left Behind in the first Bush presidency, or second, George W.'s first presidency. And what else was happening with political strategy and how they have to get into the schools and education. They have to change. And that also ties into white supremacy, especially in the South, where you have white parents pulling their kids out and putting them in private schools. And those are the parents that don't want to homeschool, you know, or you know, can't afford to or whatever. So that's what they'll do. And it's a my lifetime, like Gen X footprint. It definitely started, but I'm old enough to remember that it evolved. I lived the evolution of it. It was not always that way. And it gives me a little compassion for my parents who thought they were just taking their kids to church and had no idea that they were in the middle of a movement being born. You know?
I same. I look back, through most of my childhood was in a big Southern Baptist church in North Carolina. And my parents were on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ. And so they were steeped in like normie evangelicalism. And I can remember I'm the oldest, and my mom kind of experimented with homeschooling for a couple years with me, because there was like a resurgent pressure among parents to homeschool. And to my mom's credit, she sort of was able to sift through that and be like, this isn't for us. And we did public school. Like, it was fine. But in hindsight, I'm like, oh, I I know, I understand that better now. And I understand that there were a lot of kids around me whose parents made different choices. Some of my friends were homeschooled. Some of my friends got pulled out of school to go to private Christian schools. I was not privy to the judgy conversations about any of that. I just saw that there was like a weird negotiation of where all my friends were going to school happening at the same time. And so in some weird way, as the research for our book and reading your book has newly illuminated what was happening then in those circles. Like my parents, I think at one point did go to like one-off Bill Gothard seminar. And again, kind of, I don't think of that church as having been particularly fringe or fundamental. It wasn't. It was huge.
No, I mean, and he marketed as biblical principles. You could come from any denomination to this stadium event. You know, a lot of people also participated in Promise Keepers for the same, like the same guise of like, there's nothing extreme about this. This is just good for your walk with God.
Yep.
Yeah. It was very ecumenical.
There's so much overlap between movements that we think were very disparate.
Right. We forget they're all the tops. They're all having dinner. They're all playing golf. They're all, you know, there was machinations happening at the top.
And I think there are interesting things about American culture that make it appeal, right? Like the self-help movement was starting at the same time and other things outside. So people are looking for the next conference and seminar. And if they're Christians, they're looking for the Christian conference and seminar to help them improve their lives. And so good marketing, like all those things play into it. And sometimes I think a lot about the vulnerability, like the moment it finds people and their vulnerabilities, which makes some able to sift through and be like, this is not for us, and others unable to do that, you know, or people's backgrounds. Like we hear from a number of people who became parents right after they became Christians. So for them, someone hands them a book and they're like, okay, this is the Christian way. And they want to do it the Christian way. And I see that on social media a lot, like brand new influencers who are committing their lives to God. So they're ready to embrace tradwife everything and tell others.
It's so conflicting for me too, because we sit here in 2025 with the most access to information, evidence, research, technology. We have case studies and you can go find out, oh, how did this work for people?
Right.
You know? So we're going to hold them to a higher standard than, you know, where we had to go like copy books, you know, pay 30 cents at the library. If we wanted to make a photocopy of something. We had to put a piece of paper up on a board if we wanted to connect with a community of people. You know, we were just so much more siloed and alone before technology. And these young influencers in the new tradwife movement, like girls, come on, Google some survivor stories. It will take you a second. And you will find it.
Yeah. Or even the awareness too of the failures of many of these leaders, right? Like I think that was not as publicly aware in the 80s and 90s. People didn't know, it was whatever was presented. Like no one was able to say, well, wait a second, what's going on with Doug Phillips? You know, or something.
Who's never been married or had children advising families.
Right.
Google Bill Gothard sexual scandal and you'll get some answers.
Right. And now you can see, this isn't theoretical anymore.
Exactly.
And yet I think those impulses, the longings, the fears, the aspirations, are still very much there. Plus it's very lucrative in new ways now, but
good things. And there are marketers that are willing to exploit them for it. And I think without really sound self-development, which indoctrination interferes with self-development, and a critical thinking, you know, you're vulnerable to these very sophisticated systems that know how to exploit your fears, your deepest, darkest fears.
Oh yeah.
We've talked a little bit about like how word of mouth things were, like the mentorship and not just the ways that these conferences kind of work their way into congregations across denominations, often without people knowing like exactly what they are. I'm curious though, in the communities that you were in, like what other, like where else were you encountering like parenting advice or books? Like were people giving you books? Were they giving you tapes? Were they recommending parenting conferences? Like what did that like information ecosystem look like for you as a new parent? And I'm curious to know like what the standard resources were, like what were the names that people were saying, hey, go find this person?
Oh yeah, this is great. So, this is where I think the world needs to strengthen their techniques and their approaches. So evangelicism is expert at each one, reach one. And they have this down to a very, very developed science. Everybody knows to do it. And they don't just do it for the salvation story. So they do it for the whole lifestyle, and they're very good at it. So, the first word of mouth was Sunday school teachers in the nursing room. I was sitting next to breastfeeding mothers and asking a question, and I was revealing in that question that I was a seeker. And being a seeker, I would be given the books. I was passed to train up a child from hand to hand. I was invited to my first homeschooling conference when my baby was 12 months old. I was not going to be homeschooling for years, but they wanted to make sure I was getting in there early. So here I am with my little umbrella stroller pushing my little baby through the hall, the vendor hall, and there's the Amish, and there's the, creation people, and, all the things. And then there's Michael Pearl's thing. And so your Bread Becker's is, grinding wheat and it smells like bread. Like it's a whole holistic sensory experience. And then, I'd go to, when I did become part of the homeschooling community, we were at the ball field, and different PE programs, art programs, things like that. And always our cult within a cult, I knew who was safe to talk to and who was safe to get advice from and who was not. Now, what I was doing in my own life that actually really helped me get out of here and was contending with the world. So because I wasn't raised this way, I did value my pediatrician. Because my daughter, my third baby, had a congenital heart defect and died, and I had a lot of medical intervention through that experience, I did want to take my babies to the doctor. And when I would go to the doctor, I would encounter a world where they respected my religious freedom. They respected my parental autonomy. They would give me advice, but it was my decision to make. And I didn't know what to do with any of that power. That was completely foreign information to me. What do you mean I get to make a decision about my child's vaccines, for example? And I would have these little hot-headed arguments with this very patient pediatrician. Bless his heart. He would be, I'm this 20-something, maybe 23, 24-year-old, young moms dripping in babies. And I'm arguing with him about vaccine theory and science. And he's a doctor. And I'm talking to him like I'm a peer. And he would storm out and he'd say he couldn't be my doctor anymore. And then he'd come back and he'd say, okay, tell me about your worries. And we'd have these conversations. But eventually, like somewhere around in that first 10 years, the Sears books became very popular. And it was more gentle. It was a little more intuitive. I still have some problems with the Sears books today. But at the time, it was oh, here's a way I can not hurt my children. Here's a way I can be more attached to them. It was a great contradiction to the EZO's program because I had been in Baby Wise at that point. I'd been in Michael Pearl's and Doug Wilson's parenting world by then. So the Sears was like water of kindness and empathy and compassion. And it made no sense to me to hit my child and say, don't hit your sister. Like that kind of reasoning was not jiving anymore. And so the Sears books became, I bought the whole series and I poured over them. And then the internet came right then, and I found other women who were different kinds of Christians who had been educated, who had sense of self. They didn't have religious baggage necessarily. They were open to science and they were open to psychology, which was huge because psychology helps us understand the impacts of these parenting methods. And religion shunned psychology entirely. The only doctor we had available to us was Dr. Dobson, and that's very questionable. We didn't know that, because it's all justified by other pastors. I love this about your work where you show that the validation comes through other pastors validating their work. And so, it was a widening scope of realizing that the outcomes didn't match the promises and that there were alternatives, because I had been raised with no alternatives. I had in my church experience that this was the way, the truth, the life. This is one way or the highway. This is it. And when that didn't work, you were just stuck. And the world was like, no, actually, there's more ways to try this. There's other alternative ways. There's evidence that doesn't work, that it's actually harmful, that it's setting your kids up for failure, that it's breaking your relationship. This was a big one because I realized how many pastors had truly shitty relationships with their children. And I didn't want that, and I was afraid of that. I was like, I'm going to lose them. And I knew I was going to lose them because the scope unravels that way. That's what happens. So, yeah. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's what it's like to live it.
Thank you. Yeah. And that really,
Pearl came up, Wilson came up, Dobson came up.
Ezzo.
Sears.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Greatest hits, you know?
Yeah.
Trip. There's like some basement published people that I don't remember their names anymore. Sproul Jr. was a big one. We were in Covenant Reformed and Doug Wilson's Land of Canon Press. So, you know, you get no lack of editors. It's a lack of editors and a lack of culpability. There's no one checking if you can say that or should say that or, you know.
We've talked about that with Ezos, especially like some of the self-published stuff. It's like, woo, not only is this bad advice, it also like really badly needed an editor, but that's beside the point.
The artist side of me, the artist side and the writer side was like, this is gross. It's like when Christian music went through this really terrible phase. I don't know if maybe it's just characterized that way, where it's like, these are just bad ripoffs of world music. This is not original music. And the artist in me would not be able to handle it. I was like, I need real art. I don't need a carbon copy that's kind of supposed to pass. You know, so I was sneaking real music and I was sneaking real art. And I was like, come on, give me some risk and ingenuity. And
well, and I have like a sneaking theory that for some of those self-published things, the like, for lack of a better word, like ugliness of the finished results was part of a selling point. Like, really we take this so seriously. It's not going to have, you know, silly pictures or, you know what I mean? Like, and so there was this
lifestyle you're tapping into. It is part of making your own toilet paper and grinding your own wheat and
it's like make it harder, the hardest possible.
Y2K, you know, Y2K was coming. We all had houses full of prepping stuff. And so if you got like a stapled together worksheet of parenting advice, you didn't question the format. It was like, this is extra special because not even
there's no frills. yeah, exactly. And yeah, certainly there's a lot of sharing credibility. They just pass it around with different people and then hands off. Like I found it so fascinating when we got hands on early editions of books to be like, oh, Gary Ezzo's everywhere. And then he disappears in the night. It was like once he falls out of favor, his name's gone. You know? Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned Sears versus Ezzo because the Ezzos hated attachment parenting, right? Like that's the villain in all their books that they're really working against. And I do think Dr. Sears opened a gateway for a lot of Christian parents because before that, in this era of parenting from Dobson on, anything besides authoritarian, more discipline is viewed as permissive and opposite to Christian principles. And so I think that offered like, oh, maybe there's an alternate path in a pretty significant way. And yet
it was Martha. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's Martha's book that was the big portal because she has a book on labor and we were all having home births and we were all looking for ways to make them hurt less. And Martha has a birth tip for making your belly hang out so that when you're in labor, you look like you're 11 months pregnant instead of like closing yourself up. We would pass that around. Like, here's how to make your birth hurt less. And you would just, that's what would let people let something like that into their lives. Cause like, I'm just going to follow the birth advice.
Interesting.
But it's going to all you can do is snag that back of waters. It's literally the best metaphor for like, nick it and it all comes out. Anyway,
it's true. Like take one card out and the whole house tumbles, which is why I think sometimes people just triple down. Like they are like a death grip on this. And we have come across this most often around the issue of corporal punishment for children, right? Like we knew we would be writing about it. We knew it was a piece of it. Continues to be the most biggest touch point when we talk about issues of Christian parenting, and also is something that Christians will sometimes defend as if everything depends on it, like the level of defensive-ness and fragility. So let's talk about corporal punishment. It's a staple of most of these resources. It's often connected with this like hyper-spiritualization. We call it a liturgy, liturgized spanking in our book, because there's often these very specific made up steps, but that involve prayer and confession and atonement and things like this. I know it's a piece of your, the communities you were in and of your own story you mentioned earlier, all the way up into marriage relationships. It was normalized. Okay. So community wise, how were the communities complicit to this? How was this joked about? Was this sermons from the pulpit? Like, what happened if there were families who said, no, we're not spanking? Like, what happened to them? Like, Can you speak to the way the communities kept that alive?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say that my personal background with corporal punishment as a child was mostly around the time I was 6 to 8, maybe, and getting into trouble. And my dad at the time worked away from home for the week and would come home on the weekends. And so I was like, a Friday spanking was like for my sins of the week was my thing. So my parents were just getting into the strong-willed child when I was a kid. And I was a strong-willed child. I mean, I still am. And it's a strength. But yeah, like that whole ADHD, 80s kid, James Dobson really honed in on. So my background with corporal punishment is that there would become a time where it made sense. And the rationalization that I brought with me was like probably for safety. Like if your kid's running in the street, then you want to do anything you can to stop them. And that might involve inflicting pain. And so that's the rationale I kind of approached it with. When my baby was born, and I was given to train up a child, that was from a quiverful mom of 10 kids, and she had a glue stick in her diaper bag. So very quickly, I was instructed on how to blanket train my baby, and I refused to do it because switching an infant seemed particularly cruel and unnecessary. And I think I had been a nanny, and I knew enough about baby care to know that, well, they don't need to be.
You don't have to do this.
There's nothing willful here with this. And conditioning them through pain just seemed cruel. It just didn't seem, I didn't have a rationale, like a thought process behind it other than my instinct was like, absolutely not. But then you hit the toddler years, and the toddler years are such a focus. It's when parents first start to feel really out of control of this little baby. Again, the scrutiny comes upon them of what kind of job they're doing and what they're setting their child up. There's so much fear used. Like, Michael Pearl's book opens up talking about parents that they're Holocaust victims of their child. Like the fear mongering is so severe. And you have to get that little monster under control. It's like the language, like you don't think about your baby the same way anymore. You think of it as this villainous adversary that's trying to thwart your spirituality, and you must suppress it. And so we were immersed in that. Like, I don't know anybody who didn't spank. I know lots of people who didn't blanket train, because that was really seen as like a extreme thing. I got overt lessons in how to hide my switches in public, so you could like hit them in the grocery cart. If they're sitting in the grocery cart, no one would see you. A lot of emphasis on avoiding mandatory reporters, which is why we didn't go to the pediatrician, or weren't supposed to. I was breaking that rule. Because stripes on their legs, kind of a thing. And then, I mean, it was just, the idea was that you would stop spanking them at some point because you'd get it all done when they were really little. But that's not how it happened. Like, even in the large families, I knew of parents setting up rooms where there would be the whole kit, all of the kids, like organ pipes, 10 kids, in a row, and spanking sessions with, the thing that changes the mini blinds, the little roller. Mini blinds. And 60, 80 swats, with scripture memory and prayers, for some minor infraction. Usually mom didn't have a handle on the day, and she could sense on her child's countenance a sinful attitude. And so they would have this session. That's what was happening. And I was like, well, if you did all the baby spanking, then why are you still doing this? Yeah. It didn't make sense. And then around that same time, my husband introduced domestic discipline, which is wife spanking, and it's the same. It's the same mentality. The husband is responsible to God to answer for everything in his household before God. So that includes his wife's behavior and thoughts and deeds. And if she's not submitting, what's he going to do about it? So we hear so many sermons about this in the mainstream. Women should be obedient. Women should submit to their husbands, and not so much. They don't talk about, well, what happens if she won't? Yeah. What are you going to do about it? Well, what does a parent do about it in Christianity when their kid won't comply? They spank them.
And that's the only tool often given. So it's of course going to escalate. That's what's going to happen. Yeah.
Today I'm a grandparent of 2 toddlers, and their mothers are so desperately trying not to go into corporal punishment land, but they understand now how tempting it is when you have to keep them from running out in the street. Don't let them do something dangerous. How are you going to restrain or teach or control or contain? The tools for that, they exist. There definitely exists how to parent a toddler kindly, but the information is not as evangelized. It is not as readily available.
And it kind of, I think, involves a reorientation of the framework that isn't that hierarchy. It has a long view that says eventually this child will be an individual. How do I equip them for that versus how do I control
Completely agree.
everything? And so it does often lead to deconstruction of a number of things, which I think is why sometimes it gets held here. And also when you start talking about theological things underlying it, there's all sorts of motivations for people to keep it. But the normalization in the community, I think, prevents people in some ways from questioning. Because, yeah, if you see a mom with 10 children doing this, like certainly she's got it together or has some sort of wisdom of how this should run. When I like that you identified often it's maybe she just lost a handle on the day, and certainly once you have quiverful family logistics, you understand things like blanking training and instant obedience a bit more, because it's like, yes, one human being cannot homeschool and run a household with 10 people without relying on these things. Yeah.
Postpartum depression, subsequent pregnancies, a uterus falling out between your legs because you've had so many babies. I mean, there are so many things that impact that. And yet her standard is the same. She must have total compliance. You must be smiling, cheerful, giving thanks to God, singing through your day. I mean, it's not just keep your child out of the street. It's why aren't they always happy and smiling and giving thanks to God? And if they're not, you better spank them until they agree to do that. So it's when I was seeing that, I was like, this isn't even what you promised me when they were little.
Yeah. Oh, what a crushing weight.
Yeah. Yeah. And getting to discussions of beating a spouse, to me, that was like, when you wrote about that and you've talked about that, I find that to be so shocking. But at the same time, having read so many of these books now, you can see how they get there when you have this system of forced compliance and pressure on the husband to try to force the compliance and force particular attitudes from everyone in the household. At first I was sort of incredulous, and then it was like, okay, well, yeah. Do you have a sense of how widely that was practiced in your communities?
Often enough that my inbox gets a Me Too pretty regularly. I got a lot when the book first came out and when Shiny Happy People came out, because I talk about it on there too. I got so many messages of Me Too, particularly from pastors' wives. That was the number one response I got. But now it's at least once a week I get somebody saying that was my story too, and nobody talks about it because it's mortifying that you would come, you would agree to it and you would comply with it. I was pregnant and so scared for my personal safety. And when I tried to get a divorce, the counselor said, you need to honor him more. And that message of, I can always obey better. I can avoid this if I'm obedient enough, was what I took away and internalized, which is very consistent with my whole life. If I'm just good enough, I will avoid the bad consequence and it won't be an issue. That's not how it works. As far as how widespread, I know that there are clustered groups where the pastors are preaching this on the down low. Men are sharing this information, privately, and it is more common in certain groups. Definitely Doug Wilson's sphere, these churches, his denomination, Covenant Reformed Evangelical Church, is what I was a part of when my husband learned about it. And so I know that affiliation is there. You will never hear the smoking gun of like, here's what you should do from the pulpit. It's not overt. It's not, I don't think for that reason, it's not as frequent as sometimes it might sound like when I'm talking about it, but listen to the older daughters, listen to the young teenagers that come up and they are also being disciplined as young women by their fathers. That's a lot more common in this group. So, it just, I think the more we talk about it, the more people come, oh, hey, that was me too. It's just why I knew I had to talk about it. I knew I couldn't skip it. I never thought I would. It was the thing I thought I would never reveal. but then it had to.
Yeah.
There's just so much shame in a lot of these places. Like, I think I understand the not wanting to talk about that. Just like I understand parents who respond to our work, not wanting to admit I did this to my children, and now I am ashamed that I did it. Like there's
a lot of
so
that.
much weight to those things. It's so hard to admit them out loud.
Yeah, there's a lot of grief work, and guilt and grief are twins, I think. So when you feel that weight of guilt, you have to grieve that you were led this way, that you did these things, that they took other opportunities from you. Like some of the grief is like what you could have had if you'd done it differently. And that's how you metabolize it enough to talk about something and accept it. That doesn't mean that it's easier. It just means that you're not going to destroy yourself in the resharing.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, this is part of why we resonate with the language of betrayal, because for a lot of people, they were promised something as very young parents or in a very vulnerable moment. And wow, when it actually played out, it robbed from them.
It does. And it helps
connection they could have.
And see why. Why are they instructing entire congregations of people to create followers? Why do they need thousands of followers for an authoritarian model that they're taking to the government? Now it starts to make sense of why it's so important for young parents to breed and to control their children. There's an agenda at play, and that's been redemptive for me to understand and share that I played into a system. It wasn't mean-spirited on my mentor's part. They were just doing the same thing that they were then told to do. I'm utterly convinced that this was going to bring God's blessing. And it doesn't manifest that way. So it's somebody's human will, and let's look at that, so that's how we end up in Christian nationalism.
Yeah, because the people at the top benefit, right? They're the only ones not getting spanked, right? In this system, right? The men at the top, nobody's, there's nothing for them, right? Except maybe sometimes split with other alpha men at the top of these. Maybe there might be a little bit of that, but they have ultimate unchecked power, which leads to how do we see this manifest in other realms, Kelsey?
Yeah, which, I mean, this is such a bummer of a place to end. But the last thing I wanted to talk about is something that you've talked quite a bit about, Tia, is the connection between the structures and the teaching in these fundamentalist communities that bleed out into normie evangelicalism, and the connection between that and authoritarian politics and right-wing politics and Christian nationalism, where we're heading now. And one thing I guess I thought one place we could start was where the line was in your communities. There is this tension between kind of the more like, post-millennial army of God, we're going to outbreed the liberals. There is that kind of orientation of family life, like the real kind of the children are our arrows. We will take back culture for God.
Doug Wilson, Doug Phillips, those guys.
There's that thinking, but then there is also the isolationist, like the let us create our homeschool enclave where we have complete control over our families and retreat from the corrupt world that is going to just corrupt us. I mean, if those are two like ends of a spectrum in these places, where did your communities fall? Because I see those as kind of in tension with each other, even though there is so much overlap between people who kind of articulate the same kinds of practices.
Yeah, I think it really much is a spectrum, like the line. You can be at different points on the line. I think different parts of my story, I was in both areas of that. We were definitely longing to go be part of a private commune. We wanted to isolate from society only because we did not think that our lifestyle could really have an impact on the world. And so we were at least wanting to make our existence about our own religious freedom and goals. And once we realized, no, actually the structures in place to impact the world, let us focus on raising politicians. Let us focus on raising leaders that are going to take us into this Christian worldview. So it kind of, the tension's real. But I think that's kind of like effectiveness is the thing that kind of divides them.
I wonder too if people like Francis Schaeffer and others who weren't necessarily speaking to family life were cracking that door open and sort of saying, like, we can reclaim the worldview in pivotal ways, like broadly speaking, kind of like issuing this rallying cry to sort of say Christian culture could be good for everyone. And we could do this in every realm of life. And other people were doing that, right? Like the Seven Mountains people and other people who are kind of like inviting this. So then when it merges, I think that's a really interesting insight, you note, of like, oh, there came a point of like the recognition we could change this, though. Maybe we don't have to retreat, and maybe we should.
Schaefer and Doug Phillips and initially Doug Wilson and Sproul too. They showed us that you could partake in the good things, the big lusty life of good wine and good bread and good and good academics and good books, and you could kind of redeem them for God and bring them to the wider society. And we had such a the Schaeffers, especially with Labrie, they had such a liberal arts like redemption of culture. And so for people who come from like Gothard fundamentalism, which is so crude and ugly and primitive, and then you can get into this beauty, it's attractive, and it was definitely a stop on the journey. It once you realize it didn't sit well, I would say, with me when I realized, wait a second, that's a real departure from respecting everyone's religious freedom. That has crossed a line, because that's when I think I started to realize that we loved protecting religious freedom as long as it was ours, but we had no intention of respecting anyone else's. And I couldn't reconcile that. I'm a real golden rule kind of person, and I'm a live and let live peacemonger. I don't want to raise soldiers. I want to raise people who get to actualize their lives and live till, they're very elderly. So I don't want war. And I wasn't into the culture war, and I wasn't into oppression. And I really understood that so much of our luck is where we're born and who we're born to, and that all sides feel very justified in their holy causes. I'm very impatient with religious war. I think that's so, like, we need to advance beyond that. We need to get to the place where we're not having a crusade again. And and that whole Pete Hegseth crusade, Doug Wilson mentality is like, would you please grow up? Like, we have science, we have a chance to be better here, and you're pulling us back.
And we have a whole historical record that says we know where this goes. Like, this does not end well. So,
I heard a news influencer yesterday talking about crucifixion coming back, and I just had to put my phone down and walk away. I didn't even read the story or listen to the whole story, so I can't even tell you what it is. But the fact that sentence exists, just makes me crazy for humanity. Like, that is not the world I believe in. I think God is expansive and beautiful and holy and divine, and wants us to, be more of a protopia. We want to be advancing. We want to be improving. We want to be solving the world's problems and ending suffering. So where we're going in this trend backwards is so bonkers. It's so bonkers, but it starts at home. It really does start at home with the mothers. I mean, patriarchy can't continue without women. It really needs the female participation, and the hand that ruins, the hand that
rocks the cradle
rules the world. Yes, it's absolutely true.
Yeah. So I have one question that we didn't talk about, but I'm wondering, because sometimes when we talk about this, we'll hear from people who kind of eye roll and say, this is alarmist to say that trad wives are evidence of this happening in the White House or something, and I think it triggers a defensiveness for a number of reasons. But from people who've lived this, what would you say? Why do the alarm bells ring so loud for you? Can you speak to that?
Great, because there's nothing wrong with staying home with your kids, and there's nothing wrong with enjoying the simple life and caring about nutrition and wanting to cook from scratch and have chickens. And, I love all of that stuff. It really sends off alarm bells because it has a wider agenda that oppresses other women, that makes society smaller, that forces one way that's right, that denies women agency and choice in life, that doesn't answer for all of the women who can't come home and have chickens and stay home with their kids, and penalizes them for it. I'm not about that. And so when I realize, they're doing the exact same thing, it's just watching it and repeat and knowing that 10 years from now, we are going to see a collective exodus of these kids. These trad wife kids are going to grow up. And they're going to have their own ex-evangelical movement. They're going to have their own awakenings of, this is what it was like to grow up in a trad family. I can't wait for Ballerina Farms kids to come out and tell what it was really like to be her kid. It's coming. At least one of them's going to crack. So that's statistically, like we have these exile stories. So, I don't see any distinction except for technology. There's not a distinction.
Yeah. Yeah, it is so true. It's just the insidious switch from this is great, I love this, to this is how it should be. Like
God's way.
So subtle.
Right?
It's so subtle. And then you add the religious tone and immediately you're out of the realm of this is a thing I want to do. Even as like a neutral influencer just selling stuff. No longer. You're like you're selling something by claiming that it is God's best for women. And at that point, you're making claims and creating a hierarchy of existence for other women. And so it's not neutral anymore. It's not a just live and let live situation then. When I wrote that article about Tradwives, that was a really common kind of feedback I got on social media was like, why don't you just let these women have what they want? And so I'm not interested in telling anyone they can't do any of this. I'm and that was a reported piece. It wasn't even an opinion piece, but it was just pointing out that this isn't a neutral presentation anymore. It's not even just marketing. It is making claims about spiritual goodness and God's will for the lives of women. And that's an entirely different conversation than Ballerina Farm selling sourdough starter for I don't know how much at this point, but it's just a different thing.
Yep.
So that's, yes, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of like a happier place we can wrap up this conversation.
Well, maybe we can hear more about your work, Tia, because you're committed to this. Yeah.
Book focuses on something we've touched on several times in this conversation, and that is self-development. Because when I left, I had no sense of self. And I had to rebuild my life. I couldn't speak. I couldn't order pizza. I had a stuttering problem. I didn't know what I liked, who I was, what I believed. And the danger of that, of remaining in that place, is that you can cult hop. You can go from cult to cult and group to group and high control dynamic to another one. And it did in several instances. But I also rebuilt my life to the person who can do all of this work today. And that's the question I get far and away the most of like, how did you do this? How did you how did you reconcile this with your family? How did you finish raising your kids? How did, that kind of stuff. And so the new book is not memoir. It is more of a survivor's guide of the terrain that I navigated and what I learned from it, so that I'm hopefully clarifying the healing landscape for people who are coming out of it too, because it is really daunting to have so many resources. It's like the flip side of having so many resources. There's so many avenues to go down. There's things to consider. And I just was so fascinated with people that I would encounter that have no religious baggage at all. And I was like, what is the difference between you and I? How do we raise adults? Because I didn't want to raise children who are, adults that were behaving like children. When I came out, I was 33 and so naive and so broken. And people saw a 33-year-old actualized woman who'd had 9 pregnancies and 5 babies. They expected me to act like an adult, but I didn't have any adult skills and I didn't have any adult mindsets. I was a follower. That's all I had known how to be, was a follower. And so, the new book, that's what that does. It's the journey to self-actualization for somebody who was groomed to not have a self. And I can't wait to share it with the world, because it's the thing that gets us into progress, into power, into each person having, finding out what their message is and what they want to share, and changing their family generational lines of trauma. And so you don't become the next cog, that's just repeating the same mistakes over and over again. There's a how that happens. And that's what my book drills down into, is how do you stop breaking cycles? How do you stop continuing things and know better than your parents? I want to be.
That sounds so needed. Yeah, that sounds so needed. And even we talk a lot about Christian family life teaching, but I think so applicable to even well beyond that, right? Because the general messaging often is any self at all is selfish, and you should be a follower. That's what you should be. So.
Before it was selfish, because selfish ish in italics.
Yeah,
that's how I sold it. So I was like, I'm reclaiming the word selfish. We are told it's such a shame-inducing word. And I had a sort of sense of self. They didn't like that title, so it didn't stay. But
yeah, I think that will be really welcome to a lot of readers. So thank you. Well, where can people find you? I know they can find you on Instagram. Is that where's the best place to find you online if they want to hear more
where
from you?
people like to consume their material. So I'm on all the social platforms at Tia Levings Writer. I'm on Substack, tialevings.substack.com. And I have a website that can point, in any direction that they like. And my book, A Well-Trained Wife, is available anywhere books are sold.
Yay, great. Well, we'll link all that in the show notes so people can easily find that. Thank you so much for joining us. Great.
Let's keep going.
Yeah. Can't wait to read the next book. And listeners, thank you for joining us here in the Church Library. We will see you next time.
We are so glad you've joined us in the Church Library today. This is Marissa Franksburt
and Kelsey Kramer McGinnis. And if you liked what you heard here, we think you'll be interested in reading our forthcoming book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families.
You can pre-order it now wherever books are sold, and it'll be on shelves in October of 2025.